What do you say in a job interview when you're hit with a question you completely blank on? What if the real answer isn't flattering or you've never faced that exact scenario? This is a subtle trick you can use if you're very careful. Let's say you really don't know the answer, but you can get it. There's one move that shows maturity and initiative, and it might save you, and that's for approach number 4. Today, I'll show you how to handle this situation like a pro without tanking your chances of landing the job. What can you do? We've got a few suggestions that will help you maneuver out of these tight spots. By the end of the video, you'll have 5 proven ways to respond and one risky move that you probably should never try. Let's start out with briefly understanding what's going on. When an interviewer asks you a question, clearly they want an answer. And many people often forget this, they may be asking you a question that they expect you won't know the answer to, and they just want to see how you'll approach it. The flip side is, if it is something that you really should have an answer for, not answering could potentially put your candidacy in jeopardy. Now, before we dive into these approaches, let me tell you about the one time I was put on the spot and my boss bailed me out in the worst possible way. To be clear, this is not what you should do. I was in a pretty high level meeting. In fact, I was the lowest ranking person in the company there. At this company, they had unrealistically high expectations of everyone and did not take it well when someone did not meet these expectations. Really a high stress place. Someone asked a question that definitely fell under my umbrella. The average cost or an interest rate or something. Not only did I not have the answer, I had no idea where I could find it if I was set out to get it. My heart was racing. Then, to my relief, I heard my boss pipe up with the answer. I made a mental note to ask him where he got it from so I wouldn't be put in this uncomfortable hot seat again. When we were alone, I asked him, and his answer was everything I'm telling you not to do. He said, I just made it up. Shocking? Yes, he made it up and no one questioned him. But let's be honest, unless you're the boss, that's a terrible move. And I want to reiterate at this point that making something up generally is not a good option. The odds of you getting caught are just too high. So what should you do when you're in the hot seat and don't know the answer? Let's break it down to 5 smarter approaches. When they ask the question, you might really know the answer. It's just buried under that pressure. So let's take a look how to buy yourself a little brain time without looking clueless. Approach number 1, take a breath. Sometimes it's just your nerves, and if you give yourself a moment, you'll have the answer. You might try slowing the conversation down by saying something like, that's a great question. Those few seconds might give you the time to retrieve that answer from the back of your memory. Alternatively, you could ask the interviewer if it's okay to come back to that interview question later in the interview, but only go that route if you're going to be able to answer the question, for it will look really bad if they come back to you with the question at the close and you still have no answer. Now, note, it is not recommended that you ask to come back to it later in the hopes that they'll forget the question. Even if you're lucky enough that they do forget, they may remember later on that you didn't answer that one, and it won't reflect well on you. What if the real answer isn't flattering or you've never faced that exact scenario? This is a subtle trick you can use if you're very careful. Approach number 2, pivot slightly. With this approach, you can pretend you misunderstand if they say that's not what they asked. For example, if they ask how you handled a certain situation and you didn't handle it well, you can answer how you would handle that situation. So, for example, if they say, describe a difficult situation you encountered at work and how you handled it, you might answer with a common difficult situation and the best practice answer. So, for example, how did you handle a supplier who called up and explained they were short of cash, and would you pay their invoice early? Now, in real life, when this happened to you, you might have responded with a curt, not my problem, we'll pay you on the due date. But you might not want to share that with the interview. It really doesn't make you look good. It doesn't make you look kind or compassionate. So instead, you might say that you would explain to the supplier that as much as you would like to pay them early, it's against the company policy, and such early payments are flagged in your ERP system and would be stopped. You can also respond that the situation never happened, but here's what you would say. Now, here's where it gets risky. The next move is something politicians use all the time, but should you try it in an interview? and can you pull it off? Approach number 3, the related question, or I call this the danger zone. You've probably seen this at work with politicians, and they often get away with it. But be aware, if you try this, it could backfire on you royally. If the interviewer realizes what you are doing, they could press you on the matter, asking you to answer the question they asked, not the one you want to answer. Even worse, they let it slide, but decide later on that this was a serious character flaw on your part, and you lose any chance of being hired. Sadly, if this happens, you'll never know the reason. Okay, so what is it? How might this work? Let's say they ask you to describe the difference between the income statement and the balance sheet, and heaven help us, you don't know the difference, and you're up for an accounting job or a finance job, so you really should know the answer. So instead of answering the question, you decide to pontificate a little bit on the importance of financial statements. It's related to the question that they asked, but it's definitely not what they were asked. Now, you not only will come across as something just shy of a snake oil salesman if you do this, the interviewer will probably realize that you don't know the difference, and that is not good if it's a finance or accounting job. The alternative is to take a guess at it like my boss did that time, but you could get it wrong, and if you get it wrong, then you're talking yourself out of a job. In this case, when you really should know the answer, there are really no great options if you should know the answer to something, but the following 2 might help. Let's say you really don't know the answer, but you can get it. There's one move that shows maturity and initiative, and it might save you, and that's for approach number 4, the follow-up. When you cannot answer an interview question, sometimes the best option is to simply say that you don't know the answer, but that you'll get back to them with a response immediately after the interview. Obviously, this isn't great if it's a knowledge-based question, like what's the difference between the balance sheet and the income statement, but it does work for some other behavioral questions that they might ask you. Of course, when you take this approach, you need to get back to them ASAP, ideally within a few hours of the interview. The side benefit of this, I'm always looking for the silver lining, is that you could also very briefly reiterate any points you think they should consider when reviewing your candidacy. And sometimes the best answer really is, I don't know. Here's how to say it without sabotaging your chances and maybe even scoring a few points. Approach number 5, being honest. I call this trying to make lemonade out of lemons. Just tell them you don't know. Remember, sometimes they're purposely asking you for something that they don't expect you to know. They just want to see how you'll react and how you'll handle it. Will you try and snow them, or will you tactfully explain that you don't know? You know which approach will get you further. In this case, you might want to prepare something that goes along the lines of, that's a great question, and the next time I'm asked that, I'll have the answer, but I don't know. I'll do some research on the issue in the very near future, like tomorrow. I'm a fast learner, and I'll be up to speed my first day of the job, and I'll have the answer if I'm hired. There's no sense telling them you'll get back to them as suggested above if it's a knowledge-based question, because they know the answer. Want to make sure you're never stumped on an interview again? I've got a fast 15-minute prep video linked here, and it could save your next interview. Good luck.